into it. First of all, the media that we are embedded in are designed to amplify anomalies. In other words, here's a story. Man goes to work, does moderately good job. No newspaper on earth would run this as a headline. Why? Because it's not news. It's ordinary. On the other hand, Volkswagen-sized chunk of ice falls in Massachusetts farm field. This is news. And if it passes the first gateway, which is the local news reporting apparatus, passes it on to the AP and UPI and like that, then it makes its way out into the electromagnetic medium. Well, in the electromagnetic medium, the laws of perspective are weirdly distorted. The further away you are from something, the more real it looks. The closer you get to it, the less substantial it becomes in the world of media. So, for example, let's say that the New York Times on a certain day reports that in a Massachusetts field a large chunk of ice has fallen. And so you look at that and then you think to yourself, oh, let's see what Dilbert's up to. Of course, with the New York Times, you will not be satisfied in your quest because there is no Dilbert, because the great gray maiden doesn't stoop to comics. But suppose you're reading a civilized newspaper. Well, then you just go and read Dilbert. But a newspaper like that is designed to be read by 5 million, 6 million people per day. Well, sure as hell, someone will open the paper to page 42. Chunk of ice falls in Massachusetts field. And they will notice that the county in which this field is located contains their mother's maiden name initials. And by that, and a dream they had the night before of something wet falling from the sky, they realize that God has sent them a message. And they call work and cancel, and jump in the car and head for Amherst or wherever the action is. Well, meanwhile, the rest of us go on about our business, with one exception. Editors of newspapers where the story has been put out are now getting feedback. And so the editor calls up the Cub reporter. He says, we're really getting a lot of interest on that ice fall in Massachusetts deal. I want you to drive up there and get the story, interview everybody, find out what's going on. Is there a religious angle? Is there a this? Is there a that? What did people see? So this guy thinks, I have to find honest work. But until then, I have to drive up to Massachusetts and find out what's going on. The person for whom God was speaking to them and the reporter encounter each other at the edge of what is now a drying mud hole. And then he says, and who are you? He says, well, funny you should ask. I'm Dr. Raymond Hammurabibird, expert in telluric energies, ley lines, radiesthesic energy, genies, afrits, and ancestor spirits. And I can tell you what's going on here. This confirms a theory that I published in my book, Turning the World Upside Down in 10 different ways. I self-published my book, but and you're off at this point. And so, to make a long story short, and you maybe can't always follow this advice, but it's very good advice, nevertheless, whether you can follow it or not. When confronted with the irrational, or the extraordinary, or the miraculous, it is legitimate to carefully examine the messenger. The key to understanding what is going on is to examine the messenger. People don't do this. They examine the testimony of the messenger. So they say, now stand exactly where you were standing when the saucer first appeared Aha. And so it was 20 degrees above the horizon, and it moved, so we can calculate it must have been moving at this speed. This is not the right question to be asking this person. The right question to be asking is, have you ever seen a ghost? What's your position on the resurrection? How do you feel about homeopathy? What's your position on major earth changes in the short-term projection of things? And if you do this, you will begin to discover an epistemological naivete, I maintain, that the illusion that you and this person are living in the same Idaho begins to break down. They have categories and presuppositions and expectations that you can't follow along with. And so the illusion of communication is necessary for there to be the mirage of an event, is essentially a way of putting it. So these things are like informational viruses. It's because of how we as organisms handle information. For example, here's a counter way to approach a problem in nature. Suppose you want to know how much electricity is running through a wire. The way to do this is to measure 100 times, add these numbers together, divide by 100, and you will have the average amount of energy flowing through the wire. Now suppose your 100 numbers fluctuate between 3 volts and 3.5 volts, except that measurement 72 tells you that 11,000 volts are running through this wire. Well, what do you do with that reading if you're a good scientist? Well, you throw it out. You say, well, that's crazy. That can't be right. There's something wrong with that one. Get that puppy out of there. In other words, you reject the anomalous. Instead of pouncing on it and triumphantly raising it on high for all to adore, you simply eliminate it. The media works exactly the opposite. It seizes on every night 1 million people go out and look into the night sky. They see zilch, the stars, the moon. One person goes out, they see a triangular spaceship 800 feet across with red running lights broadcasting, the second chapter of Mark. Well, what are we told the next morning? That this was seen and this disrupted the night sky over Phoenix or Alamogordo or someplace like that. Always someplace you aren't, by the way. So people say, well, but is it all like that? Is it all so much like that? I think it pretty much is. People don't like, I've told stories here about strange events, but I've said the real weirdness does not have to be treated with respect or as though it were fragile. True weirdness is true weirdness. You can kick the tires, honk the horn, drive it around the block. Phony weirdness is incredibly fragile, and they don't want you to get near, and you can only see it if you stand here, and please don't touch, and the speaker is veiled, and the voice is distorted because the CIA might kill him if they knew who he was. A million reasons why it's just not totally straightforward. All resting on the preposterous notion that we couldn't stand knowing the truth, and therefore these things must be shielded from us. Well, if we're so fragile, why weren't we shielded from the knowledge of the president's blowjob? That shook up more people than the knowledge that extraterrestrials are trading human fetal tissue for advanced technology. It seems to me that as psychedelic people, we should be more immune to these rumors of miracles, signs, and wonders than the rest of the population, because we have a benchmark to measure it against. And the cultification of discourse and the rising tolerance for raps, which don't make sense, is a really weird aspect of the end of the millennium discussion that we're trying to have. Somebody on no evidence at all can can introduce the most preposterous and outlandish hypotheses into a conversation, and it has to be treated with the same respect that the pronouncements of quantum physics or evolutionary theory are treated. And then people say, well, how do you not throw out the baby with the bathwater? Well, it's tricky. I think we all need to get our razors clarified, and also a little less politesse would be all right. I don't know what it's like here. I said all these things I'm saying to you now to Rupert recently, and he said, well, you're just, sinking in Malibu-itis. He said in an average English pub, if somebody started raving about this stuff, there would be half a dozen people on their feet instantly just sneering it out of existence. Well, upstate New York is halfway between London and Malibu, so maybe you're leavened with reason and temperance. But there certainly is a lot of loose-headed metaphor building out there in the intellectual marketplace. We almost need a new vocabulary of fluff. There are different kinds of fluff. For instance, there's what I call deep fluff, which is fluff with a history. So that would be, for example, alchemy, which is something dear to my heart. Alchemy is fluff with depth, because it's 4,000 years old, and even though it's never made good on its promises or agenda, it just keeps popping up in various places. It's generated a rich literature. It's deep fluff. The kind of fluff that freaks me out is where you get one person who never read the Old Testament, never read Plato, doesn't understand mathematics, music, history, art, literature, religion, economics, or philosophy, but they have all the answers. Because when they were in the desert, the archangel Malingi appeared to them and downloaded the entire shtick from A to Z in 11 simple lessons, which they will share with you for a significant portion of your income. This kind of thing, you should automatically... the mushroom said to me once, apropos of all this, and I've tried to live by it. It said, for one human being to seek enlightenment from another is like a grain of sand on the beach to seek enlightenment from another. And, for me, that puts in perspective all this malarkey about lineages and secret orders and having to sweep up around the ashram for 15 years before they cut you any juice and all of that stuff. If, a truth which you cannot understand is of no use to you. So don't tell yourself that the fact that you don't understand quantum physics is okay because these guys at MIT have it under control. Until you understand it, it's utterly useless to you. So people live by hearsay and rumor, and people delightedly spread rumors of the miraculous. And people say, whoa, did you see that thing on TV the other night where they had that Air Force colonel who claimed that he was there at Roswell when there's a buzz? And, well, to repeat this kind of stuff is the equivalent of taking home a newspaper with a headline that says, Alien Mom 9 gives birth to dead Christ. This is not something people of intellectual integrity involve themselves with. Isn't that a downer, that rap? It's so, and it's especially a downer when I get more specific than I have been here. Because, of course, it really becomes cogent when you tear into somebody by example. And the reigning cult of niceness precludes that I do too much of that, because my own ox might be gored. But I do urge you to disperse your money and attention with extreme miserliness when people start telling you they have the answers. There are no answers at this point. Part of growing up is to live without answers. Culture is a kind of con that works on you if you're smart till you're about 35 or 40 or 50. It takes longer for some people. But if you live long enough and you're paying attention, you will eventually notice that culture is a con. It just wants to pick your pocket and get your vote and make a fool out of you. And around age 35, 45, 55, people just say, screw it, who needs this? I'm not going. Or they become defenders of it because they somehow see into a wisdom that it contains that I have not perceived. I think really, there is an idea around that sometime in your mid-20s you mature, and that then you are a fully mature human being. This is obviously not true. You're still a puppet of culture. The maturation process goes on into the 30s and 40s, and if you live that long, what you should end up being is an independent person, free of ideology, free of object fetishism, consumer fetishism, free of pathological attachments to other people, free of codependent relationships. I mean, these are all things which people in their 20s are just beginning to encounter as possibilities. And if you don't grow past these things, then you become these people who watch daytime TV and roam the malls and vacation in artificial paradises and, a lot of lottery, attention to lotteries and to publishers' clearinghouse minions that are soon to arrive, and just a squirrely lifestyle, hardly above the level of a laboratory rat. And if consciousness expansion means anything, it means thinking your way out of these cultural cul-de-sacs and dilemmas. Don't buy anything, because very, very rarely is what you are being sold what it represents to be, nor worth what's being asked for it. Yeah.
Do something about our planet quickly.
Well, in terms of suggestions, and we have 10 minutes left, so I'll be able to get out of here without the hour of discussion this usually provokes. In terms of suggestions, when I once said to the mushroom, how can we save the world? Somebody had challenged me in a group like this. They said, why don't you ask it how we can save the world? Which I had never been, being sort of an oblique thinker. It had never occurred to me to be so blunt with it. But the next time I found myself with it, I said, how can we save the world? And without a moment's hesitation, it said, each person should parent only once. This is an astonishing idea. This is not zero population growth. This is population falling by 50% every 20 years from here on out. If people in the high-tech industrial democracies would limit themselves to one child, almost immediately the destruction of the Earth's ecosystems and resources would halt. We preach population control in the third world, but the statistics show that to a woman in the first world who has a child, that child will consume between 800 and 1,000 times more resources in the course of its lifetime than a child born in Bangladesh or some other third world place. So if we were to practice this one person, one child policy in the first world democracies, there would almost immediately be a visible slackening of the pressure on resources. And population is the thing which is driving everything over the edge, and is not allowing any time for full reflection about land use, implementation of technologies, the political directions we want to go in, because everywhere, you just hurl money at problems like sanitation, detoxification of land, education of children, cleaning up of water supplies, extension of early primary education, and so forth and so on. No matter how much money you throw at these problems, you see no progress because it's all dragged down by burgeoning populations. So, and it's interesting, I've always felt that the way to solve social problems, collective social problems, is to find solutions which advance the agendas of individuals. In other words, some version of enlightened self-interest. And if you think about this one person, one child thing, what we're saying is, how would you like to have increased leisure time, increased disposable income, and the sincere gratitude of humanity by volunteering to limit your procreative activity? And I would favor social policies that would give people cradle-to-the-grave medical care and cancel their income tax and whatever it took to honor people who did that, because that is the most significant single political act any one of us could probably do. It's very practical. It's a bumper sticker. It astonished me when the mushroom said this. I thought it was going to be a discourse. It said, each person should parent only one child. In a single sentence, it offers probably the only solution to our long-term dilemma on this planet. Can we do it? Well, we don't know. It involves changing our habits, the hardest things we have to change. It involves injecting novelty in an area where habits have ruled for millennia and tens of millennia, our reproductive behaviors. On the other hand, as primates, we never really get rocking and rolling until we're painted into a corner. Now, China is attempting to do something like this, but of course they start from a more problematic circumstance than our own. However, if China continues to limit its population, that's the one piece of the puzzle missing from its ability to project its culture onto a global scale. If the rest of us pollute our social systems and drag the development of our economies with burgeoning populations, at the same time that the Chinese population is falling and they are bringing their technologies and infrastructure up to speed, then we could find ourselves in a very different socio-political circumstance not far downstream. Any comment on that whole idea? It's an interesting idea. I'm surprised that there is no society for it. I've never heard it discussed. Not radical lesbians, not libertarians, and I also thought when it first came up that there must be some hideous political flaw in it, that some radical feminist or somebody would spring forward and point out this appalling contradiction as to why this couldn't be done or why this was utterly unacceptable and dehumanizing. Nobody has ever done that either. People have said, the only criticism I've had of it is people have said that political power is based on population. But I argue that's not true. If that were true, India would be the second most powerful nation in the world. Well, what about France? What about Germany? What about England? So, we are not in a breeding race with the brown-skinned people of the planet. Thinking like that is crazy-making. What determines the viability of a society is the quality of life that it delivers to the greatest number of people. So I think one person, one child, those of you who haven't yet entered the reproductive phase of your life, you might consider. People have objected and said, well, but children need other children. This is arguable. The nuclear family is not handed down from Mount Sinai. The nuclear family is a late 19th century invention at the convenience of industrial capitalism. If there is a human model handed down from Mount Sinai, it's the extended family group, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, all together in a long house or a compound. Well, we haven't lived like that in America since the 1840s. It was no way to live anyway. In 1800, the average American woman gave birth 13 times in her life. This is no population, this is not a behavior pattern we want to emulate. I think that we are sentimental, that the concept of the child is some kind of morbid download from 19th century romanticism, and that it's a morbid concept. The child in our society is symbol of innocence and victim of mayhem. It would be, in Amazonian societies that I've observed, children are small versions of adults, and as quickly as they can handle them, they are given responsibilities and roles, and they participate in life, birth, death, sexuality, hunting rituals. There is no this idea that we screen people from the facts of life because they are innocent and fragile. And it's a complete paradox in our society, because while we're dishing out this rhetoric of innocence, we're creating a popular culture so steeped in images of violence and abuse and rape and so forth, that the idea that there are any secrets from anybody is a pretty hollow rhetoric. So we need to re-envision our relationship to children. They are more precious than we have tended to treat them. They are more central to our future than we have tended to admit. And our population policies, if they don't swing around to take cognizance of this, will probably derail all our best intents to build a sane and caring world. Anyway, that's the opinion of an extraterrestrial fungus on a matter of human population.